impromptu stream coming on. Chatting with a friend KungFuJoe. Say hi.
Hey,
Hello. Sounds
going
like
on,
you're
man?
okay. Just do a little bit more like kind of sound tests. Just start saying something.
Something.
Yeah. No, that sounds great.
Oh, cool. All right. Not bad.
So you wanted to come on. You had this method for healing racial inequality, racism.
Uh, well, let's see. Man, how far do I want to go back on this? So I guess we both know Fanatic, right? I know you've talked to him
Yeah.
before.
Yeah, I have.
Um, Not the easiest person to talk to
Mm-hmm.
about anything contentious. Definitely. He it's kind of weird. It's kind of I found it like not very useful to talk to Fnatic because he's already got his mind set. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you know how usually I'll ask a person with a certain belief, like, um, what could I show you as evidence for you to believe that you might be wrong, right? Or what evidence could I show you to have you so for you to change your mind,
Mm-hmm.
you know? And for him, I believe it's nothing. Like the bar would, I don't know, like the bar
Well,
would be set so
I
high.
can say
So,
because this is such a specific experience of um, talking to a fanatic about something that you disagree on and saying what evidence could change your mind. That's a really specific thing out of this conversation. I actually have had that experience.
mm,
Yeah, we've talked a number of times. I have to see if any of those VODs are up. Those would be cool to put on my YouTube. But we're coming from different backgrounds on gay people adopting and just kind of like an outcomes based empirical thing. And we were going back and forth on a bunch of different studies. We weren't kind of finding anything 100% like nail in the coffin. And then I messaged him one day. I'm like, hey man, I got the holy grail of studies. It was for I think it was Norway. I want to say I might be wrong. I can look this up, but it was like the entire country was being studied. It wasn't like they were pulling people at random, trying to pull people at random to study or something like that. It was actually just the whole nation, everybody's status and outcomes, and they were saying that there's like there's like basically no difference between same sex versus mixed sex children's outcomes, except for two women maybe have like slightly better outcomes for a kid. Um,
oh, okay.
but
Yeah, I think they did a South Park episode on this too, where they
hmm,
had the eggs. Like, in grade school, they would give a couple, they'd pair two kids together, give them an
I know
egg with
about
a
that from
smiley face
Buffy.
on it. Yeah, yeah. Give
If you
them
know
an
the
egg with
episode,
a
yeah.
smiley face on it. No,
Mm-hmm.
I haven't. I'm not familiar with that one, but
Hmm.
Mr. Garrison or Mrs. Garrison at the time was
Hmm.
trying to prove that having two gay parents is worse for children than it is two
Mm-hmm.
cis parents or whatever. So he broke up he rearranged the class differently. He put like the boys with each other
Hmm.
and the girls with each other, and they found out like they had boys with each other, and then I think cis like girl and boy together, and he found out that the boys actually did a really good job of
Mm-hmm.
together and stuff like that. I thought it was kind of funny.
Yeah.
Um,
But yeah,
not
I've had the
sure,
exact
like, yeah.
opposite experience. I mean, uh, it's interesting because you first came to me to try to figure out how to talk to people with different perspective. I would say that he is a difficult person to talk to if you have a different perspective.
Well,
So I
he's
can
the
see
one
how
who
you
brought
guys ran
me.
into challenges there.
That's the guy that made me basically say that to you.
Okay,
Is
interesting.
he's the one. But I was like, I had a couple talks with him,
Mm,
and then he just did not. he just did not want to speak to me anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Mm-hmm.
he blocked me on Twitter, and he I feel like he really didn't look good in a lot of our talks because he usually, I think, when he thinks he looks good, he'll post that
Well,
on his
here, that's fine.
YouTube.
We don't need to kind of go off on like one particular person, because so
Yeah,
that was maybe what catalyzed you to be frustrated about something that you feel from the black community as them looking at the white community and seeing you guys are all just like helping each other out and kind of like fucking over black people in like a very open way. Is that like a fair?
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, like so there's this view that I kind of got from Fanatic and his community, which is basically that white people just help each other out and they fuck over black people or whatever. Um, but if just the first part were true, if you just said like white people helped each other out,
Mm-hmm.
we still see the same problems. I mean, we would still have the same like situation we're in today, right? Like where it seems like they're getting ahead simply because they're screwing over somebody else, but it could just be because they're helping each other and not necessarily screwing over anybody.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, yeah. I guess there's a lot of situations where helping versus hindering one group versus another can become equivalent. Um, I mean, I think there's something to be said for there are lots of communities where you'd say, okay, they kind of stick together because they have to, and they kind of help each other out. There's an ideal for America, which is that whether or not so somebody who's naively kind of I don't know if anti-white is the right sentiment, but who's naively kind of like thinks that white people are up to something will say, hey, look, all of the presidents before Barack Obama have been white. Most of the Senate, most of the Congress, most politicians, whatever, are white. Like, you guys have all the power. And the response to that, the kind of like standard American ideal of a response is to say like, okay, whether or not somebody is like of a certain race in public office, they have their goal is to uphold this duty to serve all Americans. And you shouldn't look at political control as something that's in the hands of white people, as a kind of like group who's acting in their own interest. It happens to be the case, and maybe there's lots of things that feed into that, but it's like you shouldn't look at it that way. But that's kind of, I think, what the question comes down to is it's like, if the police department is mostly white, would you say that it's like okay for them to be kind of playing favorites with white people because they're white people that stick to their own? I would say that they shouldn't. They should be so far above that, acting in a kind of public service ideal.
No, I agree.
Yeah. Um,
I just don't think that is the one. I don't think that's what the main argument is from, I guess we could say, like the defund or BLM like perspective of the police. Like I
mhm.
think it's not so much the problem to them is not so much them helping other white people out. It's them disproportionately screwing over or messing with black people or
Yep.
abusing their power
And
towards black
so
people.
that's what we talk about when we talk about systemic oppression. Is it's like it's not that like the individual cops are racist or individual politicians are racist or something like that. It's like each of those people could be, doing their best to try to uphold that kind of like ideal of public service. It could be that broader systems are set up in a way that discriminates, right? And you could see this like, it gets more clear. It gets like very, very straightforward if you go further back in American history, where you say, okay, it doesn't matter how nice slave owners are trying to be. the system of slavery is just unjust. So that's a system that has to be dismantled. And then you could say, okay, well, it doesn't matter how much like individual maybe bankers are trying to be equitable. The system of redlining is like racially discriminatory, and so that system has to be dismantled.
Mm.
Right? So there's like very, very straightforward, very, very clear kind of today inarguable.
Well, I wouldn't say very clear. I kind of disagree
You wouldn't say
with the.
slavery
Well,
or
no. Slavery is definitely immoral. Like I'm talking about systemic racism. Like
well, mm,
I kind of disagree with that with systemic racism. Like just the framing doesn't seem to make literal sense, right?
okay.
Because racism is intentional in nature, I believe. Like it's an intentional belief to believe that one race is inferior, right?
Hmm.
And if the definition of systemic racism is that the individual actors within a system are not consciously racist,
Hmm.
but that the system still produces racist
Yep.
outcomes, it just doesn't make sense because racism is intentional.
Sure. Oh, what word would you use that you think makes more sense?
Just say
Systemic racial
disparities.
bias or systemic racial
Not even
disparities? Um,
no, not even that. Hey, Fred. They're just disparate outcomes or disparities. I would think it's kind of make them
Systemic racial
more
disparities.
well. Not I, I don't necessarily think that the system is the producer of the disparities.
Huh. I mean, so okay, so I guess this is where.
Oh,
So I think there's like.
a few.
Oh, so,
What's
sorry.
what's
What
that?
was that? I don't know. Can you still hear me?
No, I was talking to someone.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. No, I
um,
hear you.
so so kind of like approaching this from different angles. Let's say just as kind of like a sanity check. Like, do we agree that it is empirically the case that there are racially disparate outcomes in America?
Sure.
Like that the whole so when we were talking about systems before, we were talking about like maybe specific kind of policies or like agencies or something like that, or school systems or whatever, but like the entire system of like all of American society, that whole like total system produces inequality, right? So then the question is like, what are the most kind of like major things that account for that disparity being produced? So when I said I think like wealth disparity is probably a big part of that, right? Because it's like if you grow up in a family where your parents have some time to spend with you, and maybe they can pay for some of your college, they can pay for you to go to a better college. You can they own their own home, and you can stay with them for a while after college, build a little bit of wealth yourself. You're not immediately, you're not in the situation of having to skip school to work to help your family. Those are all things that are based on wealth, and the wealth gap between white and black Americans is massive. In my state, it's I think it's like $164,000 for median white wealth and $7 for median black wealth.
Okay. Um. Wait. Can you say that? Repeat that again.
Yeah, so there's so many things that I look to. So when I think about like my life trajectory and the things that helped or could have hindered me. I mean, I'm relatively smart. I worked really hard in school, but I also was able to live with my parents after coming home from school, and like having a job and not paying rent, you're putting a lot of money in the bank. But if instead of going to college, I had to immediately start working to help my family just pay for their own pay for their own rent, that's something that would have really really negatively affected my
So, could I ask
my
you really
life.
quick, like,
Yeah.
what what kind of situation were you born into with regarding your parents? Like, what did they already have by the time they had you?
hmm they had a mortgage on a home. They both were like working
Out of
professionals.
they graduated high school or college,
Graduated college. Um, my dad was doing
got a
his like
degree.
master's degree, while as like a night school thing while working while taking care of us. Um,
Okay. How different do you think your life would be if they had you in high school out of wedlock?
yeah, I mean that would have been a very different situation. That's more like my grandparents' era. They were in their like you know they were like 19 and 20, I think, when they had my mom, and then my dad's situation was very very complicated.
Right,
And
right.
all, yeah.
Yeah. So, but it would make a difference, right? Like
hmm
what kind of how you would come out
hmm
of those two different universes
Oh yeah.
would probably be vastly different,
hmm
correct? Like so,
Yeah.
it's all, but it was all based on the choices that your parents made.
Well,
Now,
it's based on the my ability to make choices were based on the choices they'd made that were based on the situations that they'd found themselves in. If they were in situations of um, generational poverty and oppression
well,
and lots of
they
different other
didn't
things,
just,
then they wouldn't have had those options open to them, or
but
they
to be
certainly would
clear,
have been.
they didn't
Yeah, go ahead.
just find themselves in a house or anything when they had you, right? They had to put themselves through high school and college and make the
hmm
conscious decisions to get those things out of the way. They
Of course, yeah.
prioritize
hmm
those things. They
But
prioritize
yep.
education and employment,
hmm
right? And marriage and all
Yep.
those things before conceiving you.
hmm
So it's definitely they had choices to make. And had they made other choices, I think
hmm
the outcome would be different, right? Like
hmm
it's not like everything just landed in their lap, right?
No, of course not. I'm talking at like at broad scales when you look at like the proportion of people in communities that graduate high school, right? You can say like maybe these are all just individual choices, but it's like if I were talking to somebody individually, I would do whatever I could to help impress on them how important it is to graduate high school. I would try to connect them to tutoring. I would, you know what I mean? Like at an individual level, of course, I would try to help that person individually. But I don't think it makes sense at like a policy level to say like, oh, these people all just happen to be choosing not to prioritize their education.
Oh, that's why I would not make any policy prescriptions in this area. That's why I say it definitely would come down to mostly culture, and you have to make conscious culture changes. So let's say, you know what if your parents, let's say, were
hmm
influenced by a culture that said, you know, why are you working so hard in school? That's what white people do. Or why do you speak correct English? That's what white people do. And you would lose your, whatever card of the race you belong to, which is kind of like the situation in the black community where they say like, oh, why are you talking white? Why are you, reading books? That's for white people. Like you're basically shamed and having your black card taken away for being smart. I think if you have a culture like that within any group is going to just fail in society if that's the predominant culture within that group.
Sure. Do you have something to point to say this is the predominant culture, or this is the degree to which this culture is active, or this is the causes of this culture, or culture is something that people just I'll wake up one day and I'll have a different culture. Like, is that really how culture works or how culture forms? Because I think of it more as like, oh, um, if a community is down or is kept down, then right? If let me think of how to phrase this. It's not good to become to feel like things can't get better, or to feel victimized, or anything like that. Um, I wouldn't push anybody to feel that way. I would, in general, at a personal level, I would always push people away from those kinds of feelings. But that's very different from recognizing that those things literally have occurred. And I think to say, oh, hey, black people, your disparity in wealth does fall back to, yes, slavery, yes, Jim Crow, yes, redlining, um, yes, differences in getting shoot, was it Pell Grants from the military? I think I'm thinking of the wrong thing. Um, but yes, all of these policies, and wealth has a pretty big impact. I mean, people who are wealthier in general tend to have kids later. They tend to do more family planning. They tend to prioritize school more. So to say that, like, oh, this is just kind of like your culture that's bad and you just need to fix your culture, that does feel like you're kind of erasing all of, like, known American history for something that you just, like, won't have to be involved in, because you're like, oh, black people, you need to get some leaders
Yeah,
and tell everybody to
yeah,
just be better, right?
let's look
That's
into
that's
that
what I'm
part
hearing,
then.
and I'm sure that's not what you're saying, but that's what I'm hearing, and I would like to learn, why it's not that.
Sure. So do you think if if all those, like, the past, like all those past harms,
Hmm.
let's say if it were in a different universe where
Hmm.
none of that happened, right?
Hmm.
But then black people still adopted this culture of, hey, you shouldn't read books because that's what white people do, and they still had that culture. Would that not still lead to a problem if it was, left to linger and fester and grow over like a couple generations?
Sure, yeah. I mean, you could look at, like, um, so I'm Jewish, and in my culture, reading books is like, and education is like a really big deal. Um, but on, so that accounts for maybe a certain level of, like, fighting for being accepted in schools, because, yeah, like black people, Jewish people are also not allowed to go to universities, and then over time we're eventually able to. Um, but there's Orthodox
Why do you
Hasidic
think?
Jews. Oh, sorry.
I had this question.
Yeah.
I want to see what you think about it. Why
Hmm.
do you think Jewish people came came out so much better from the discrimination than black people did?
I think probably because we immigrated here instead of being brought across in ships as slaves. Probably has a big part of it. Yeah.
Why would that be? What-
Well, if
Well, I
you're if
mean,
you're
they kind of,
enslaved,
in a
you
way, they.
lose your family, you lose your community structure. You might be enslaved on a plantation with other people from different parts of Africa that you don't share a language, and then for hundreds of years, you're dehumanized. You're not building your 401k. Let's say, if you're in human bondage.
Saying that the
Um,
racism isn't what held black people down. It was the slavery,
well,
the
sure.
legacy of slavery.
So it's kind of like a weird parsing that you're doing.
Well,
Like,
you parsed it, right? Because I was wondering why the discrimination has different effects on both groups, and you're saying, well, it's the slavery
Well,
part.
the slavery is one of the differences between the racism toward Jews and towards blacks, right? It's a pretty significant difference, I would say, right?
But you're saying that's the differing factor.
It's not the only
Like that.
differing factor, for sure.
Okay.
That's just that's like a if you wanted to choose just one, that's the difference. If you had to say, what one thing best explains the difference between the place that Jews are at in the U.S. compared to blacks, I would say slavery. Being brought to America as a slave, being versus like immigrating to America is probably, I would say, the number one thing. It's obviously not the only thing,
Mm.
but I think that's right. I mean, do you not
Is
do
it?
you not agree that that would
Well,
make a big difference?
I agree that makes a big difference, but what I'm trying to if slavery is now gone, right?
Mm-hmm.
Are you saying that we're just still seeing the kind of leftover effects of it still like hundreds of years later? Is
Is is
or
is that? I mean, I'm
why
I'm
like okay
assuming,
with
and
the
I'm reading
police
from that you
discrimination?
doubt any kind of link between those things. I want to hear you say like where you're actually at with that. You think like, oh, it's preposterous that that was hundreds of years ago. How could slavery have any impact today? Or
I
where's
think
where's your kind of like,
well, what
yeah.
I'm thinking is that Jewish people just have a better culture that is more easily integrated into this country and is more easily integrated into the educational system and to
Well,
things like that.
I mean, what do you think about the public school system?
I think it's
I
pretty
guess.
terrible,
Okay, sure,
terrible
sure,
for the most
sure.
part. Like,
You think that America would be better off without the public school system? We should just have, rich people can go to schools and poor people, I don't know, they can work at Walmart or something. Is
no,
that
we could have. I mean, I think people should just be able to. I I mean, I don't know. I Public schools seem to waste a lot of money, in my opinion, and
mm,
they have bad policies where it's like it's more expensive to fire a bad teacher than it is to just keep them on board and
hmm
stick them in a back room somewhere. So I think the public school system is like highly could I don't think we should abolish it. I think it needs to be revamped though. Like the whole thing
sure,
needs to be broken
yeah.
down and rebuilt maybe.
No, I
But
I won't I won't disagree with you that there are massive issues with the public school system, um, and I mean I think George Bush with his No Child Left Behind teaching to the test is like a really really bad way to educate kids, just to say like, oh, you just need to be able to pass the SATs, and then that shows that you're an educated person. I think that's a really
yeah,
bad approach. I think like critical thinking, all these things that maybe aren't as easy to test for are still important. But when you say like, oh, the black people obviously don't like education, that's their culture. It
well, no,
was
if I say that, I'm saying that one of the problems within Black culture is that there's just this one part that you find that a lot of them can attest to, and even Fanatic himself, when we had this conversation, he admitted that it was something that often happened to him.
mhm,
But then when I used that as my answer, like, well, hey, don't you think they're going to have less um, scholastic and financial success if you have this type of software running, in their brains?
mhm.
Like I would think that would ruin any group. Like any group's potential to thrive in this society would be crushed if they had a culture like that.
Sure. So the point that I was just going to make was that it was African Americans during Reconstruction that basically founded the public school system and advocated for the creation of the public school system. So this kind of like oh, Jewish culture versus black culture. I mean, you can say like, just now, today in impoverished inner city communities, with like poor high school graduation rates, is there a kind of like tear each other down mentality where it's like, oh, I see you doing well in school and I'm going to make fun of you. I mean, first of all, kids make fun of each other for everything, but um, is that optimal? No, of course not. But to have this myopic perspective on like this this like exactly just where things are right now when all this horrific shit has occurred, and just to say like, I don't think any of that is relevant. I think it's just like, you just like gotta be a little bit more, pro spelling bee, and like that's the issue. I don't. So let me be clear. I don't disagree with you that this is an issue, and there are tons and tons of black leaders who are working really hard to try to improve that. But to say, I mean, what's the outcome of this exactly? That just like we that this is just black people's problem. This isn't something that we as a nation should reckon for our past actions, or like what's the kind of takeaway from this?
I mean, the takeaway is that so basically, like again, like people like Fanatic and the BLM type people think that we should pay some type of reparation or something for the past harm that's been done, and that would somehow correct, just it would just turn, that it's kind of as if to say that reparations would take that kid who's been influenced by the culture of, hey, you shouldn't do well in school because that's what white people do. Like it would just turn that person into a more productive like member of society. I don't see how that would happen.
Well, so let's take like a specific example. So a kid who gets very little tutoring from their parents because their parents are working whatever, 2, 3, 4, I don't know, jobs, right? If they had the wealth to take out a mortgage on a home, and then they were renting, or they were at like a mortgage instead of a rent, and they eventually own their own home, and they could be working just one job, and they could spend more time with the kid, and then they would have something to pass on to the kid, and then that kid would have a house, and then they could be working like a less intense job that they could be doing some education on the side. Do you think that would have like no impact on educational outcomes?
Well, see, now you've kind of touched on another issue see, a lot of these things are comorbidities, right? So it's kind of like that one bad symptom is kind of linked to another. So yeah, if more black kids had both parents in the home, that would be, that would lead to a lot of what you just said, right? Like, but the reality is that they have, one of the highest out of wedlock birth rates. I think it's like 72% or something like that. It's
And
really
there's
high.
also how many black people are in jail, or how many black fathers are in jail?
Um, I don't know if anyone's ever done a study of that, but I mean, not 72% of them.
Sure. I mean, I don't know. I'm just seeing this right now, like about 500,000. Um,
Yeah, well, that still doesn't get us anywhere near the solution to the two-parent problem. Like that, I've heard this before.
doesn't
It's
it?
a pretty, yeah, it's a pretty. No, I mean, but this just isn't the reality. You have to look at again. There's this. It's cultural practices that are to blame again here, because
Oh, so
you can
again,
look
the
at.
fact that black fathers are in jail is the fact that they the culture is saying you should just be a gangbanger and do crime, right?
well,
That's the
that's one of the things. The thing I was hinting at more specifically is how they can just, one man. Now this is something weird, and I've actually heard it from my black friends first, and then I
hmm
did a little research on it to find out it was true,
hmm
which was that in a given neighborhood, you could have one man fathering like a large percent of the children.
hmm
So, like, one man having 11 different kids
hmm
with like 7 different women.
So how often does that happen? Are there any
A
studies on
lot.
that?
Or yeah, I think there are some studies on it, and
hmm
there's a lot of there are some very like I don't know if you want to say like Christian or right leaning black figures who are looking into this, and you've seen these guys appear on different talk shows and things like that. Where I believe they did do like a study on it.
So what was that study? Where can I
I
find that?
wouldn't. I would have to pull it back up for you. Um,
But that was the
I could
study
find
that
it for you,
convinced
but
you that this is a big problem, or was it hearing
well, no, it's just
from
that they
friends or?
that if it's as common as they say it is, like if I were to look up the exact numbers for you, like um, and you were to find that there were a lot of baby daddies, right?
hmm
Or there was a lot of baby mamas. There's not a whole lot of like, and this is both things that I've seen in studies and anecdotally, and there's like a mentality behind it too. There's one guy I talked to, he's got like when I was working at my job, he had like several different baby mamas, right?
hmm
And he kept on. He was like a security guard at a store, and he kept on trying to hit on like all these women as they're coming in and out of the store.
hmm
And he's like, "Oh, I'm trying to have some more kids or whatever." And he's like, "Yeah, So the theory for him was that if I have enough kids, hopefully one of them is a winner,
hmm
and take care of
They'll
me
take care of
eventually."
me.
Yeah,
Yeah. So in the
and
in the absence of any wealth, he's looking for a lottery ticket, which is
pretty much
unfortunately something that happens.
really sad.
It's really sad. Yeah. I mean, this is. I don't know if you've seen these studies that just being in a state of poverty makes people make worse decisions. And literally, if you give people money, their IQ increases and they make better decisions. I don't know if you've seen.
What?
There's like
No,
studies
I've
with
not heard of that.
like tens of thousands of people showing this.
Now I could
I can send you
see
some of this.
why
Yeah.
I could see why that would be true because like when you're under stress, your IQ drops.
hmm
Um,
Yeah.
your IQ can drop heavily under
And I
stress.
mean, being in poverty is very stressful when you're trying
Sure,
to make
sure.
payments, when you're not going for healthcare because you can't take work off and you don't have good healthcare anyway. Can't get to the doctor. Car's breaking down. Like I
I would
I
say
just
you could see the same brain and stress relation
hmm
between someone who had no money, who suddenly got a bunch of money, and someone who maybe like had cancer who just got cured of cancer,
mm,
right? Like you could probably see those two reactions
mm,
on like a molecular level
hmm
similar, within someone's. So
yeah.
I don't I hear what you're saying. It's a common. It sounds like a common, like a response to just having no less stress or an absence
just
of
just being in
stress.
a situation of kind of like
Yeah,
you have everything that needs doing and no like no no leverage to make it happen, right? Just so
Yeah,
much
you're
that you
on
need to
like
fix in your life, and you don't have you don't have literally the resources, the tools to actually make that happen.
you're on like the higher end of you're on the higher levels of Maslow's hierarchy of needs or whatever. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. No,
So
I
yeah. So this is why I say, I mean, when I think about, can we redistribute wealth? Sure. We like that's something that the US does all the time. We can redistribute, you know, billions of dollars to this group or this group of people. That's something that we've done, we can do, we do it all the time. Can we suddenly change a culture? I mean, I'm sure it happens. I'm sure it can happen. I don't know exactly, like, how that
did you
happens or
Chappelle
what.
show growing up? Did you watch Chappelle show when he had his Comedy Central skit show?
Oh yeah, 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 yeah. Back in the day, yeah.
Yeah. Do you remember he did this? He did this skit where it's like, oh, the government finally decided to pay everyone reparations,
Mm.
and all the. That's where he got the "I'm rich, biatch." Like the
Mm-hmm.
guy's got with the, he's got the truckload full of menthol cigarettes or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
and the punchline of that joke was that at the end of a couple months or whatever, they're like, well, after distribute giving all the black people the reparations money, it has now all come back to white people.
Mm-hmm.
Like they just spent it all up. Like so that was like another point that I brought up with
Is
the
is that
fanatic
is
talking
that
is that
is that
what do
actually
you
something
do?
that you see as a point toward this idea that it's just cultural?
Well, yeah, well, yeah, because
So
you can. It's not
so
just
do you
that. Like
remember
you could
back
look
in the day
at
why Chappelle like like left the face of public
the,
life?
this one skit has nothing to do with that, and
No,
I
no,
could
no, no,
like
not this one skit, but he talked about how the comedy that he made from the black community for the black community was being taken by white people to say like, oh yeah, black people's culture is trash. That was why
no.
he stopped Chappelle's show, or
I
that
disagree
was a
with
big part of
something
it.
there. First of all, if you have a Comedy Central show, you're no longer making comedy, by that black
Sure,
people for people, right? So
sure.
you're just
Of
kind of like,
course, that's the case. That was something that he probably hadn't fully understood the gravity of when he was seeing, when he was seeing white people quote certain parts of certain sketches in certain ways. He was like, "Oh shit, yeah, this is this. I need to reevaluate this because I don't like the result." Maybe that was short sighted of him at the time, but I mean, I don't know. If somebody gave me a Comedy Central show, I'd probably be enthusiastic and probably wouldn't, have thought it all the way through. I wouldn't like to say
so
that
would you?
that I'm above that.
Are you making this point to kind of discredit this one skit that I'm bringing up, or?
Well, I mean, that's exactly what it seems like you're saying is that you're taking him making this comedic point and saying, "Hey, this is like a thing that we should look at within our community to say basically that we shouldn't give black people reparations because look,
No,
they're agreeing that
no.
they can't make
I
good use of that money."
what I was going to bring up on top of that is we have data on lottery winners,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm not sure if you looked into this,
No, no, no.
but most of the
I'm
data
familiar
shows.
with that. It's like, yeah, if you win the lottery, you're likely to be, to be totally broke, maybe dead within like a few
Couple
years.
years. Yeah,
It's like a bad thing that could happen to win the lottery for sure. Yeah.
and this is not a black people thing. It has
Mm-hmm.
nothing to do with whatever race you are. It's just that if you're not a financially savvy person and you come into some money, I mean, and if you come into money
Well,
and you don't know how to make the best use of it,
so
it's
that's not empirically true. When it comes to winning the lottery, where you're winning like millions of dollars, that seems to be the case. Although I'm not sure if I've seen that like validated, but I'll just say that that's like accurate. But when it comes to giving like very very poor like homeless people, more on the order of like hundreds of dollars, thousands of dollars, they make really good use of it. And when it comes to reparations, it wouldn't be just like, a bunch of people get like a check in the mail for a ton of money. This would probably be some kind of like council of figuring out how to strategically make use of that money, maybe creating funds, like doing things that have a broader impact. So it probably wouldn't be, this is just a logistical thing, but it probably wouldn't be reparations just in the form of like literally people individually receive a check. That's generally not how I've heard reparations being discussed.
Yeah, sure. That's why, nobody can really agree on anything on the reparations topic,
Well,
is because
wait,
people are talking about
what do you mean? You were bringing something up different than what I said, but what I said is that in general, when I hear reparations talked about it, it means this thing. So, are you taking the fact that we've heard something different to mean that nobody can agree on this?
I feel like the people who advocate for reparations, if I take two people, two different people who advocate for reparations, right? And I ask each of them what would, reparations look like, I feel like those two people would just by chance have a totally different idea of what if it would look like. So I think that one of the reasons it doesn't materialize is because the people who advocate for it can't even agree on that what it would be.
Mm-hmm. Um, let's see. So we talked before
Kind of like
about
the defund the police, like people talked about defunding the police. Well, what do you mean by that? Some people say, no, we don't.
Sure,
Taking,
sure.
Yeah,
That was a somewhat ambiguous slogan. Um,
yeah.
I know you and Catherine have talked about maybe having a chat. Would you be interested in them jumping in?
Yeah, for a little bit. If I have to go
Yeah.
abruptly, though, you'd have
Yeah,
to.
I have to leave in really like a few minutes, so we can get you
Yeah.
guys introduced and then chatting a little bit, and then if you want to chat a little bit more, I'll have to turn off the stream in a bit. But
Yeah, no problem. Yeah,
yeah.
that's cool.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to, why will or won't reparations happen? I mean, I think there's a lot of things working against
Sure.
reparations. I don't think it's just that there isn't, pure consensus. And I
Yeah.
don't think you'll ever find 100% consensus across any
Well,
group for anything.
there's also just on the opposition, which is where I am.
Mm-hmm.
There's just a question of fairness, right?
Okay.
So
How so?
it's kind of like if I were to ask you, if let's say all the history was the same,
Mm-hmm.
exactly the same it was, except all black people today were rich,
Uh-huh.
would you still advocate for? Would you still say that it's a priority for them to get reparations?
I mean, I think if I commit a crime and I steal something, I'm obligated to give it back. That's just like a basic kind of
You are.
tenet of morality. If the person that I would be giving it back to doesn't like in one world I took their like insulin medication and they're gonna die,
Yeah.
and in another world I took like a rug from a part of their house that they never go in.
Yeah.
Like there's some practical difference between these things. I think in
But
general, morally, I'm obligated to give that rug back to I guess the dude in this situation is not what I'm
but
thinking
let's
of.
take that and map it on to the reparations argument in this reality. Would you, if your great grandfather stole something and the family later on came and said, hey, your great grandfather stole this from us and we feel like you owe it to us now,
Sure.
would you feel that was fair?
So I know what you're saying. I think this is just like a kind of like a non-starter of an argument against reparations, because it's not about some person took this from this person. The United States as a country had this policy that these people were not human beings and you were allowed to enslave them, and that country still exists. By the way, that country
Wait, if
did
just
pay some reparations for slavery. I don't know if you're aware of that.
Why is the country treated like it's its own being, like it's a person that we can just hit up for money? A country is just consisted of different people. Like we are the
I don't
country.
think that's
Whatever.
accurate at all. I mean, we owe China money, like we as a country, right? Owe the country of China money, right?
Yeah,
If in like a generation or so we say, you know, those were like some other people, we're some totally different other people. That's not going to fly, is it? Right?
but yeah, like we could say. I mean, I could see how that's like something different. Like you're dealing with one country versus another, and this is just a group of people and a country that is vastly different, hundreds of years later from what it was.
Sure. I mean,
So
it's different, but it's like the money from slavery built the wealth that's a huge part of why America is so powerful today. It's not like that money just
ooh, I
disappeared,
disagree with that.
right?
I
Hey,
disagree with. I hear this a lot where they say that slavery built the country and built its wealth or whatever, and
I'm
it's
not saying
like
it's the only
that's
thing,
actually
but
that's actually not true because the South held on to slavery longer and they were poorer for it. The
sure,
what
but
gave
it's
the
but it's not just like the picking of the cotton. It's all of the industry that goes into that. It's I don't know. We can go into a whole other thing. I wanted to make just this one other point that we actually did pay reparations. We paid reparations for slavery to slaveholders who were losing their slaves. So just to put that
yeah
out
we
there for
did.
anybody who wasn't aware of that. But yeah, I
Uh,
want to welcome on Catherine, Lilith.
Yeah,
Can put you on stream
hello.
for like literally like 2 minutes, and then I gotta go
Hey,
back.
how's it going?
Yeah, hi. Nice to meet you. I didn't
Nice to
catch
meet
the
you.
beginning of the stream, but I've been listening for 20 minutes or so, so I got caught up a little bit on the
Oh,
conversation.
okay.
Yeah. And I was like, oh, just seems like a great time for us to start talking, to get
Oh, sure.
introduced and
Yeah,
everything.
yeah. Sounds good. Was there anything in particular you were curious about me or wanted to ask?
Well, so Socrates, you're ending stream basically right now, right?
I'm,
Like in a minute.
yeah, yeah.
Do you want to do your wrap up um, with KungFuJoe before I sort of start talking with them?
Sure. I mean, yeah. I don't think there's
We kind of
anything kind of
those.
like
You don't
kind
need
of
a
horrific
yeah.
between us. I feel like yeah. I feel like we kind of got into it, but there's a lot more to talk about.
Yeah.
It sounded like there were some things that you thought, okay, maybe it's reasonable to think that wealth could have some impact. Exactly how that goes out, whether that can be like a workable policy, whatever. But at a theoretical level, maybe wealth can make some difference in people's lives. I don't disagree that culture is also impactful. I don't think it's like a button you can press and change it. And there are people working to change it. And I think a lot of people working to change it. But I think it's not a trivial thing to change. It's not like just something you can switch over. So that's why when I think about it at a policy level, but maybe you're talking about more at a kind of an interpersonal level. Where at an interpersonal level, of course, we're not going to be making policies. Maybe we'll be talking about policies, but we can, to some degree, we can make culture between each other because culture is partly just something between, groups of people.
Oh, on a policy level, I could say maybe welfare
Mm.
is something that kind of keeps the bad culture on life support. Because without the welfare system in place, people would have to get their act together and not act in ways. I mean, that's just my intuition, but
Hmm.
I know that's a whole other can of
Yeah,
worms we could
So,
open.
yeah. So maybe
This is a
Catherine, if you
great
want to make
place
an
for me
opening
to jump
statement,
in, and we could
and
start
then
talking,
I'll end
right?
the stream.
Right? Because I would frame welfare in America as a tiny band-aid on the problem of capitalism as it is built and run through the lens of a male superiority cult that exists within human culture for at least 8,000 years. And I could jump into that, right? That basically we put this tiny, in America, this tiny band-aid on the problem so people can think that the problem's being fixed, while also not having the economy completely collapse, because welfare is required for the US economy to continue functioning in a way that won't cause riots.
Sure, I wouldn't say I would want to abolish welfare outright. I would just put much more strict. Maybe it could be like a shorter time span on it, or
Mhm.
the government maybe is more a little more proactive in helping these people find employment or something like that. Like not just just leaving it the way it is now, I think, is a problem. I don't think
So,
welfare in
sure.
itself is a problem.
So,
Yeah.
so, so yeah, I might highlight that it seems like you've identified where a real problem exists. And then I would say that, oh, I'd like to tell you about my conclusions about what we could do through my understanding of what that problem is and why it exists as it does, right? Um, right? Because like I'm actually considering potentially running for office sometime in the next 10 years, depending on how my personal development goes in that time, because I feel like the political system as it exists is not for the humans that exist in these countries, right? The political system exists for the political system. It exists for the nation states. It exists for the economic systems. And it exists for the purposes of the particular individuals that get that lottery ticket up into the so-called ruling class, right? Whether these are the ultra rich or people from political families or people who become a new first person to get a high political position. All of the structures in Canada, United States, these are the two countries I know best, but they're all set up to feed the infrastructure, those systems, and those few humans at the top. And even the humans themselves are really, if you look at it from the system perspective, being fed just not on purpose, but just as part of the way the system functions, right? And so if I run for office, I think one of the things that I would make like the founding aim of my career, right? And like either as a minister here for one province in Canada, or maybe for prime minister, which vaguely similar to running for president in America. I would say like UBI, like $2,000 a person, ideally would be what I would run on, and I would run as a not a centrist, but a non-party affiliated person, because I think it is a good conservatively financial position for my understanding of markets to implement UBI. I think it is a good moral position, whether you consider yourself a liberal or a leftist or right leaning, whatever religion you're in. I think UBI would have outcomes that you, in whatever moral belief you have, would consider good, and that the fact of this is just something that humans aren't noticing right now because of this bigger system above all of us.
Yeah, and that's great because with UBI, there's no incentive to be impoverished. There's no incentive to have any number of kids or anything like that. It's just
Yeah.
something you get for being human. And yeah, I've seen I don't know if the same economic models that just show that this actually just stimulates the economy. This is actually just a
Yeah.
very efficient way to stimulate the economy.
Yeah. If you use the metaphor as the economy as a living being, then money is meant to, right, provide the role of blood, right? So money is meant to be exchanged between people for goods and services so that the physical things in the world and people's intentions and services towards each other can get exchanged and people can get what they need, right? And so a capitalist system where the attaining of money and the service of money for money, right? This idea of the profit motive being entrenched as a moral responsibility in the legal code of America, right? Fiduciary duties. This literally puts money above humans in the law of the country in America, right? And that's not an accident. That's how that system's built. But it should be, money should just flow and not be accumulated. And that flow of money is what causes a functioning, healthy economy.
Well, that's a wonderful place to end the stream. Also, a wonderful place to begin the conversation. Yeah, I'm very sorry that I have to go and end the stream. But yeah, I mean, obviously, feel free to keep talking yourselves. And yeah, of course, I'll host a lot more of these. Thank you so much for coming on.
Sounds good. I probably have to get going as well, but we could definitely
take care.
revisit and we could all have a chat again.